Okay, welcome along everybody to the webinar, free webinar, where I'm going to talk to you about 20 years of tapping. 20 years ago, I first learned about tapping, and I'm going to talk about how that happened and what happened, and give you some of my hard-won success secrets. They're not all secrets, but some of them are, because some of them I haven't told to any group or only to certain groups. And I want to give you as many tips as I can to help you along the way in your journey, whether that be a self-help journey, whether that be a journey to help other people with tapping, or whether you have a tapping business and you want to have some tips for how to develop your business. Now, I've got so much stuff here. I worked out I've got enough stuff to present for about 3 hours right now, and I certainly could go for many, many more. So what I've decided is I'm actually going to allow some time after the webinar. So if anyone wants to hang around at the end and ask me questions, I'm going to hang around for another half hour after the end. So I'll try and move through as quickly as I can the information and give you as much as I can in the hour that we have allocated. All right, let's move on quickly. First of all, the legal stuff, the disclaimer, this is just for education, it's not medical or business advice. Whilst the techniques I'm going to be talking about, simple energy techniques, EFT, my new intention-based energy process, and provocative energy techniques, have caused impressive results for a lot of people. There's no guarantee that they'll work for you as they have for other people. You have to take responsibility for use of the techniques and your own mental health. And I'm only giving general advice because I do not know your personal circumstances. So who am I? For those of you who don't know me, I've been doing personal development since I was 17 when I had a life-changing experience. I've been in business full-time since 1996. Prior to that, I actually worked in education initially. I wanted to save the youth of the world like I was saved when I was 17. I also ran a centre for emotionally disturbed kids, a resource centre across the system that was helping kids that couldn't be managed. And then I went into business for myself full time. And I've been doing that since 1996. And then in 1997, I found out about tapping, and I've included that in my business since that time. I've maintained a focus on peak performance, worked with people in the business area and in sport. I've also taught personal development workshops worldwide and taught people about the techniques. Now, let me just see here, because someone's raising their hand, but I'm not sure whether what that means. Can you all just type in the chat if you're still hearing me? Let me know who you are and where you're from. Nice to see Eric, Inga, Rob, and someone's just called administrator from Sydney. Great. Thanks, everyone. Jan from the Sunshine Coast, excellent. We've got people all over Australia. Lindy from Horsham, yeah, people from the UK, people from Europe. Femco's up in the UK, excellent. Lucinda in Melbourne. Okay, so someone said I disappeared, but I'm back. That may happen. It does happen with technology, but if you hang around, and if you lose me, come back on in 5 minutes and try again, because I'll certainly be doing that. It's happened before that I've been knocked off my own webinar, so it could happen again. And if that's the case, I'll certainly do as much as I can to get back online. I'm an author now of my new book, 100% Yes, and also a co-author with David Laker of a number of books, and also with Joe Weiss of a children's book on tapping. I've been teaching on peak performance to business owners at the Curtin University Centre for Entrepreneurship for 16 years. Okay, so what's the key secret? The key secret is make quality connections. I have to trace all of the success in my business to the personal connections that I've made with people, and the success that I've had with clients to the heart connection that I've had when I've worked with them. And I think if you want to boil down a secret to your success, you're just one connection, one good connection away from success in your business, one good connection away from learning what you need to learn to change your life, whatever it is. It's all going to come from connection. And I have to be appreciative of my early connections. I learned from Frank Farrelly, who's on the left in this picture, and I met through training with him in provocative therapy, I met my good mate Dave Lake. Yes, I did have a horrible looking thing on my upper lip at that time, trying to make myself look a little bit older and a little bit wiser. Made me look a little bit silly, actually, in retrospect. But anyway, those early connections were also in the area of provocative therapy. And I'm putting this picture up because a number of these people have actually been instrumental in things that I've been able to do since I've learned tapping. So I think it's really important to consider, you know, here we are, here we are just horsing around. This is the nature of provocative therapy, is that I learned a lot about using humor to help people back then. And now we're able to use that, combining it with tapping, which is absolutely fantastic. So the lessons from this are basically study and get excited about something, develop a network, and realize how much your current network is actually an invaluable resource. Because I had no idea when I was learning provocative therapy that a number of those people would facilitate me when I then learned tapping, taking tapping around the world. So your current network can be an incredible resource. Now, just quickly how I learned tapping. There was a gentleman named Michael Tunnicliffe. He's a clinical psychologist in Perth. I had set up my own business. I met him through a speaking association that I was part of. And I was just meeting with him to talk about business and kind of pick his, you know, get ideas from him about how to develop my business. And one day he starts saying, well, you know, how do you treat phobias? And I told him how I did that. And he said, well, there's this new technique called tapping. And he'd just been over to the US and he brought back Gary Craig's original videotapes. Now, I had a look around for them. I couldn't find one, but I did actually find one from the second series, which we ended up on because we then went and studied with Gary. So I did those videotapes. You know, I had a look at them. I think if I hadn't met someone as conservative as Michael, who was recommending this, there's no way I would have looked at tapping as even a possibility, a remote possibility, as something that I might use. And, you know, when I watched them, I just happened to be working with Vietnam vets at the time, and I was mightily impressed at what I saw Gary Craig doing with the war veterans that he was working with on those videotapes. So I instantly wanted to try these techniques out. I could see the results he was getting, but I wondered if I could get results. So I grabbed my wife and said, have you got any problems you want help with, apart from dealing with me? And she had a bit of a needle fear. You know, if she thought about needles, she kind of went and just pulled away. And so I was still learning it from the videotapes and from the manual. And I'm kind of reading from the manual and getting her to, you know, tap on the karate chop point and say the setup statement. And just one round, I could see her sigh and relax. And I thought, okay, that's interesting. And I said, you know, what would you give it now? Before she rated it about a 5 out of 10 intensity. I said, what would you call it now? She said, oh, about 2. And I said, good, let's get it down to 0. And she says, you're not going to get me to do that stupid looking thing again. But then she came home the next day and she said, well, I was fine. I had the blood test. It didn't bother me. I was even able to watch, and I've never been able to do that. So, you know, I thought, okay, well, this is an interesting result. I kept watching the videotapes, and then a day or two later, I have this client comes in. This lady is shaking like a leaf, and she's white as a ghost. And I'm working with her, and I'm working with her 16-year-old son. And the 16-year-old son is being very aggressive and violent and abusive. And I took one look at her and I said, what happened? And she says, the other night, he cut a cake and then he wiped the blade off on my arm and threatened to stab me with this knife. And I said, wow, okay. So I sent the kid out, and I was doing therapy at the time from my home. So I sent him out into my lounge room. I was hoping he wasn't going to destroy the place. But I said, you go in there, I'm working with your mum. And I just had an idea to try this. And I said, would you like to try something different? You know, I've learned about this technique. You know, a friend of mine recommended it, and it might be able to help you with this. If it doesn't, then some other things that we could do. And she said, yeah, okay, I'll give anything a try. And so we started tapping. And in the first round of tapping, she's tapping on this point, the index finger point, And it was just like, whew, the problem just left the room. And she looks at me, she says, boy, that one worked, didn't it? And I said, yeah, it seemed to. And, I still look back on that. I was so astounded. I'd seen that kind of result, but never so quickly. And, it seemed to just be directly related to tapping on this point. And I said, how do you feel about your problem the other night? And she's searching for her problem. She can't even find it. She says, I don't know, it just doesn't seem to bother me. And I said, wow, it doesn't seem to bother you. When you walked in here, you were shaking like a leaf, you were white as a ghost. And she says, yeah, it just doesn't bother me anymore. And then I said, does anything else bother you now? She says, well, if I think about him coming back in the room, it bothers me. So we did more rounds on that, and she left, and she told me the next week when she came back, she said, she drove home, she couldn't get the smile off her face. She was back in control. And during the next week, she took control. She told him he wasn't going to do this anymore. She stood up to him. She apologized to him for the things that she'd been doing that caused the problem. And man, it was just completely different. So that was so dramatic that I started, experimenting, trying it out with more people. Everybody that I worked with initially, not ever, got results. So I rang up Dave Lake, and I was talking to him over the phone, and I said, mate, I've just been introduced to this new thing, and I'm explaining it to him and having him tap on the points over the phone, and he could feel something standing out, in his garden with the phone. And so then I, arranged for him to get the videotapes. We were studying and communicating with each other about this. And then we decided to contact Gary Craig, and we invited him to come to Australia. And he said, no, but you can come over here because I'm going to do this workshop in San Francisco. And we went to the workshop in San Francisco in February 1998. And the rest for us is history. Because at that time, David got up on stage with his lifelong public speaking phobia, and Gary did tapping with him. He's got the heart rate going, he's got the dry mouth, and he taps with Gary through all the different aspects of that. And in a total treatment of 38 minutes, he goes from not being able to speak and feeling like a complete goose if he does that, to being able to stand up on stage and take questions and laugh and joke with the audience just the way he laughed and joked when we were out to dinner. So that was profound. And when we came back to Australia, I said, I'm going to start teaching this to people and incorporating it in my workshops, because Gary had given us permission to take this away and, and pass it on. So I invited David to come along, and he wasn't sure how he would go. And he says, oh, not sure. I said, well, look, you can come along, and either you'll be fine or you won't. You can do 5 minutes, or you can do half the workshop, up to you. You can do an hour, you can do half an hour. Anyway, on the way there, he was a little bit unsure how he would go. So he's tapping for about half an hour on the plane, because the workshop was in Melbourne. I live in Perth, he lives in Sydney. We both had to fly to Melbourne. So on the plane, he was tapping for about half an hour. And he said when the plane landed, the lady sitting next to him put her hand on his arm and said, it's okay, we're there now. Anyway, we got there. We stood up in front of 40 professional people at one of the universities in Melbourne, and he introduced himself, and he turned around to me. He said, I can't believe it. I don't feel any of it. And he had gone from having a lifelong public speaking phobia to having no fear whatsoever in a single 38-minute treatment, which was absolutely profound. And then that began a wonderful collaboration where we spent the next 16 years or so traveling around the world, presenting together, doing workshops, initially in Australia, and then, as I'll explain, in different parts of the world. And, in those early days, we learned a whole bunch of lessons about tapping. The first one was about aspects, about how you can have different aspects. We even learned this with David. He was fine for, for a long, long time. And then Dr. Larry Nims came over and we were invited to help out at his workshop. There's about 200 people in the room, and in the middle of it, he calls us out to the front. And we're walking out the front, and David says, "Oh, my problem's come back. I'm feeling anxious." And I said, "No, it's just another aspect. It's another part of the problem that's come up, because it's off the cuff speaking. It's very different to normal presenting." So it's crucial to learn about aspects and how you need to apply tapping to different aspects. Same thing happened a year or so later when David's wife came along to the workshop. You know, he comes up to me in the middle of the session. He says, "I'm feeling anxious about my wife being in the room." I said, "So am I." So we both went out the back and we both did tapping until we felt okay. And so as aspects come up, you can treat them, but it's a good idea to treat them up front. I learned a lot about trying it on everything. I learned that it doesn't work on everything, and it doesn't work on everything the same way. But by trying it on everything, as Gary had recommended, we found results on things we never would have predicted. We learned about varying the points, and we learned about persistence. And I think in many, many cases, a lot of people who don't get results with tapping, they haven't done enough of it, and they haven't treated all the aspects. And I've treated a number of people who've had treatment from other people with TFT or EFT, and there was nothing wrong with the treatment except it just didn't treat all the aspects. So the person was okay on some parts of the problem, but they weren't okay on other parts of the problem. Okay, I also learned some tough lessons back then. One of the first was I started introducing tapping into my Vietnam veterans groups. And I was running these groups with Vietnam veterans. I could see the results. I had results from a number of clients. I started incorporating them into my groups. And then I made the mistake of excitedly telling this to the people. Well, maybe it wasn't a mistake to talk about, but it was certainly a mistake to have introduced them and not or already told the people who were debriefing me in the Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service. And they were absolutely aghast that I would be using an unproven technique like this. I became very bloody-minded and definite because I could see the results that these guys were getting. So I refused to stop using the techniques, and they let me finish the groups that I was running because I had a good connection with the men I was working with. But after that, I had to part company with the Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service. The good news is I did get to go back later and do a presentation to them. But at that time, I learned something about being too evangelical and not introducing things in the right way. If I had my time over, I would still use it with those groups, but I would have done a little bit more to pre-frame the situation for the people in the Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service and told them about the research that was happening and so on. Of course, there hadn't been much research back then, and I was actually the first one to do a real randomized control trial on this. I also presented it to a group of school psychologists, and everybody who came out the front got an absolute profound result. And, it was so much so it was like a healing revival. Everybody was getting profound results. But after that, as far as I know, not one of those psychologists took up the tapping and used it. And what I learned from that is that when you have, when the results are too good, it's too hard for people to believe. So since that time, in fact, I've noticed when I do presentations and when I introduce tapping, if I get results which are more medium or more lukewarm, I actually don't feel bad about that because I know that more people are likely to actually take it on board. And that's certainly been the case over the years, is that the more moderate results, people are willing to have a look at it. If it's too extreme and too good, it's just too hard for them to get their head around. And even when we were training people in tapping in the early days, we had some people who came to the workshops and they went away and didn't use it. And then they came back 2 or 3 years later and they said, okay, I'm ready now. They kind of had to get their head around this. I also worked with an accountant and he taught me that not everybody feels feelings, which I should have known anyway. And I had to learn how to approach it with different people. And so he taught me that basically with some people you have to ease into it, with some people you have to provide the research, with some people you've got to do a lot of satisfying of the conscious judging left brain, mind, in order to get them to accept it. And then Josh my son, who I used tapping with since he was 3 years old, he's now 23. Back when I first started using it with him, I was using it on nighttime fears and all kinds of things with him. And he would always say, this won't work. And then I would say, let's do it anyway. And it would work anyway. But one night it didn't work. And I kind of realized that I'd been forcing this on him, and that by my anxiety about his anxiety got in the way of helping him. And so I had to do the tapping on myself before I was able to sit with him and be there in a way with him that he could actually take it on board. And I was able to do that, and we had a great result on that particular problem. And then not long after that, he started calling me for tapping rather than telling me that the tapping wouldn't work. So there's just some stuff that I learned in the early days. Then I did some research. As I mentioned, I did the first controlled scientific research. We did a study on phobias. There I am in the local newspaper with our ad for that. What I learned from this was that getting a good study published is not as simple as doing a good research study and writing it up. I learned that there are cynical and destructive forces out there. And if you are going to succeed, you need to find a way around them. Fortunately, I had a number of people supporting me in getting that study published, particularly Pat Carrington, who was there with us, Harvey Baker, who came on board to help us in the write-up. And we were able to identify who the cynics were and request that they not be allowed to review when we submitted it next. And we did get the thing published, and we got some local press, and we got on television, and it was all rah, rah, and we were flying high at that time. Then I went and presented my research at the conference, and we met up with Gary. Back when we met Gary, we had met these wonderful people, Dr. Larry Nims, Tapas Fleming, all the heavy hitters in the energy tapping world. And I certainly recommend going along to those kind of things to meet those people. What I started to do then was I started to write, and I highly recommend that you write about your experiences, or at least talk about your experiences with other people. We were fortunate because Gary had started a newsletter. Initially, it was just a list of people who were corresponding by email. And when we started with him, there was about 300 people. And by the time he retired, there was over 500,000 on his list. So we were able to write stuff in his newsletter and actually have people respond to that. He created a website, and we were able to get our articles published on our website. Eventually, we created our own website. We created our own newsletter, and we created our own books. And I think the lessons here are that you've got to put something out there. And when you learn someone, teach somebody else. So even if you are just using tapping for self-help, it's helpful to pass it on without pushing it, just letting other people know and passing on the good stuff. And when you go to teach someone something, then you learn more about it yourself. And if you're interested in building a business, you've got to put stuff out there. You've got to keep putting stuff out there, and you've got to focus on creating value all the time. Okay, ultimately, we started to experiment and play around, and we developed our own approaches, simple energy techniques, and our more advanced provocative energy techniques, where we finally realized that we could put all the stuff we learned from provocative therapy with the tapping, and it worked really well. David developed the continual tapping from working with clients with trauma, and he was using EFT originally, and he would do it in rounds. So in EFT, you do a round, and then you check, and then you do another round on another aspect, or another round on that one until it's reduced. And he found that as he got more efficient, he was getting more rounds of tapping in, and the people who had more rounds of tapping were getting better results on their trauma. And so eventually he thought, why stop? Plus, Gary had talked to us about varying the points already. We started varying the setup statements. We noticed that he was using setup statements less often. And ultimately, we asked him the question, why do you have to say the setup statement 3 times? And he just laughed and said, because Roger Callahan says you do, And because Roger Callahan, who created TFT, that EFT came from, had this setup statement 3 times. by then, Callahan, I don't think, was even using setup statements, and Gary was hardly using them at all, and he'd started using them as reframing. And we thought, well, do you really need this? And you know, Larry Nims, in his technique, he treated whatever the block was as the next problem to treat. And we thought, well, can you do that with tapping? Instead of having to use a setup statement, why don't you just treat the block as the next problem to treat? You know, the concept is that you need to use the setup statement to get rid of the resistance or deal with the psychological reversal. Well, what if you just tap on that? And we found that that worked really well. And, you know, I started experimenting, and I tried this with 70 people in a row, and every single one of them got results without needing a setup statement. And that was enough for me. And from that point on, we eliminated setup statements. We started doing continual tapping with our clients. We had them tapping the whole time in the session, and we tapped along the whole time, and we felt good at the end of it, and they felt good too. By eliminating the setup statement and getting rid of some of the more challenging parts of EFT, which, you know, like having to come up with the right words and all this kind of stuff, the clients were using tapping more, and they were getting good results. And then we discovered this concept of energy toning. Now, this actually happened in one of our retreats. We were up in Broome, and I apologise if you have a snake thing, please start tapping. In fact, if you know tapping, you should be tapping along, because you should know that you get a benefit, you borrow benefits from tapping along. We also know that you'll actually tune and tone your energy system, and the tapping will be good for you. So we were up in Broome, which is the far north of Western Australia. It's a beautiful oceanside place. And in the middle of this, we went to the markets. And it just happened to be this guy here with this big snake. And the lady who's in the foreground is not the one. It's actually the lady in the background who's smiling with the black top on. I can't remember her name, I'm sorry. But she was there, and just after this photo, I don't actually have a photograph that I could find for you today, but she said, I've had a phobia of snakes my whole life, and it's not here. And she went up and she got the snake around her neck, and she was smiling and happy and everything. And we had done nothing about snakes. We'd just been tapping on issues the whole, 2.5, 3 days at this point. And we realized that all of that tapping her problem had gone away, even though we'd never directly had dealt with snakes. So we started to realize that you can tap, and actually our theory became that you tune and tone your energy system such that if your stress level is high and your life energy is low, as you tap on a regular basis and get enough tapping, your stress comes down, your cortisol comes down, your good endorphins and so on come up, your good life energy and your confidence comes up. And so we started encouraging clients to do tapping to get that to happen without having to focus specifically on stuff. And we found some fantastic results with people just tapping on a daily basis without having to be clever. So we were starting to do workshops. That original one that David came along to was as early as 1998. And then we got the first international workshop was actually in Nijmegen in Holland. And that came from a provocative therapy workshop that we were, a get-together that we had with our key people that we met in provocative therapy. That's why I showed you that picture earlier, because in this group, of all people sharing how they were using provocative therapy, we shared and I demonstrated how we had started to incorporate provocative therapy with tapping, which started to exaggerate the setup statements, which started getting people to say, I deeply and completely reject myself, which started putting humor in. And I demonstrated this. And then a couple of people who are Jaap Hollander and Jeffrey Weinberg from Holland, from the Netherlands, said, well, we run a training program. Would you like to come up and do a workshop doing your training program up there? And that led to something else, and that led to something else, and so on and so forth. Now, when we went to Holland, this is why it's connections, people. When we went to Holland, we actually met this lovely lady that David's with, Els de Graaf. And she was a friend of the lady I'm sitting next to in the photo at the bottom, Glenn McCafferty. Now, Glenn lives in Tallahassee, Florida. Her friend Els lives over in Zeist, I think. or lived, excuse me. Anyway, she's in the Netherlands, in Holland. And on the strength of a 4-part article that I wrote in Gary Craig's newsletter on self-acceptance, Glenn had made contact with us, found out we were doing a workshop over in the Netherlands, contacted her friend Els, and they came along to that workshop. And then Els says, I'd like to organise another workshop for you next year. And I'd like to contact my my cousin, who lives in Dallas, Texas, and have him organise a workshop for you over there. And then, since we were already going to America, I thought, well, why don't we organise a workshop in San Francisco? And we just advertised that through Gary Craig's email list, and through, we were writing articles and just mentioning that we happened to be coming to San Francisco. And we had 65 people turn up in San Francisco, and Gary Craig actually came along. He helped us out. He came along and did an evening presentation of that workshop. In the bottom picture, it's actually our second San Francisco workshop. You'll see David with his daughter in the middle, Tanya, and oh my gosh, I've forgotten her name, I'm sorry. Maggie Adkins. So Maggie Adkins actually was helping us out at our workshops back then, and we encouraged her to go on. I had actually introduced Maggie to tapping. I met her over in Perth, and she was back in the States, so I made contact with her. She started helping us out in our workshops, and she ultimately went on and did Gary Craig's EFT Master Program, but she helped us out for several workshops in those early days. Tanya came along to this workshop, and she was traveling around the world. This is David's daughter. And as some of you may know, she then, at the end of that trip, she got involved. She was actually blown up in Paddy's Irish Bar in the Bali terrorist attacks. And she wasn't severely injured, but she saw some terrible things. And I was over at David's house at the time when that phone call came through from her. And she came home the next day when I was actually going to be flying out. And David did a massive amount of tapping with her, and she had a fantastic outcome on all the trauma associated with that terrorist attack. You can read about that on our website. It was absolutely an incredible thing, and wonderful to have tapping to be able to provide for such a horrible experience. Okay, so what are the lessons so far from the workshop component? The San Francisco one, I just decided to organise that, and then we went ahead and did it. Before that, before I even knew tapping, I decided to run a workshop in provocative therapy, and then I just found out all the places where people, counsellors were and people who could learn from this, and I made up a database, and then I made contact with them, and I started making connections. Same thing happened when we learned tapping. We'd made connections with Gary, and we started to make connections with other people, and they started to help us. So you need assistance, and you need to ask. It's not all rosy though. We started running workshops all over the world, and not all of them worked out. Here we are in Berlin because we were let down by our organisers up there. David was chucking a sad, we would call it in Australia, looking glum. He's actually playing it up, and we did put all the food in front of him to make it look like he ate it all. But the truth was we were a little bit down at that moment because I was going back home, and he was going on to Berlin, where the workshop that had been organised for us had 3 participants, folks. So David went on and ran that workshop. It was the first time he'd run a workshop on his own. There ended up being a couple more people that got dragged in, so I think there were about 5 in all. But I went home because I couldn't afford to be away from my family only for 3 participants. And then I started taking my family, and as you know, it's really important to live by your values. And one of my values is actually love of my family and being there for my family and supporting my family. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to set some limits on my travel and take my family with me. And so through these workshops, we've been able to take them all over the world. Okay, this was actually a bit earlier than all that, but I got involved with Pat Ahern, the baseball player, when he started working for the local professional baseball team. I helped him with tapping. He then won the Pitcher of the Year award for the Australian Baseball League. We wrote up that article, and that was promoted via Gary Craig's newsletter. And I had started specialising in peak performance with athletes. I was using it with other people in the baseball team. I became the psychologist for the baseball team, and started working with other athletes, and then started running workshops on peak performance. And ultimately, through doing that, Gary invited us to come to Flagstaff to present. And there I am on stage at that stunning ballroom in Flagstaff, where we had a hoot of a time, and I presented on peak performance, and David presented on trauma and tapping, invited by Gary Craig. And this is one of the wonderful things, is that if you decide to focus on something and you become the expert in something and you keep on going, then you're going to get a reputation for that thing, and then you get opportunities like this. So we had incredible opportunities at that time. Along the way, we presented over in Connecticut, and Jessica Ortner came along to our workshop. Nick wasn't able to come to the workshop, but he took us out to dinner. We had a great conversation, and he was just getting started at that time. But through that personal connection, I was then able to get involved in the first 6 of the Tapping World Summits, and that helped to promote my business massively. So it's all personal connection. You know, in the early days, you know, we met people, wonderful people like Carol Look, and ultimately, you know, we had a synergy. So we did some work together. And here we are in a workshop that we ran in Dallas. And here we are at another presentation workshop that we did in Brussels, which had about 200 people there. And here I am with my good mate, Andy Bryce. And here he and I ran workshops in Sydney and in London. And of course, with Dave Lake, you know, it was a collaboration that went across many years. So I've done numerous joint things. And you know, the lessons from that are collaborate with like-minded people. When you associate with successful people, you get seen as successful too. So you got to get to piggyback on their success. You also get connected to their audiences. You get connected to their databases. If you know, if you're in business, you understand what that is. You know, people who like them, some of them are going to like what you do as well. And you get to learn from success. And I think it's a great thing to do because it helps to develop your skills as well. Okay, so I've also done a bunch of corporate work. Now, I apologise for the amount of words on this, but I just started to brainstorm some of the groups and areas that I've used tapping with. And this is not all of them, but it's just all I could think of today in time to get this down for this presentation. And you know, over 300 different corporate groups I have presented tapping to. And when I've presented tapping, I have included it into all kinds of programs. Now, I didn't just present tapping in most cases. I presented conflict resolution, and then within conflict resolution, I presented a segment on tapping. I've even presented tapping in communication workshops, because in communication, it's not just about the information, it's about the energy, it's about the emotion. And if you're upset and you're trying to communicate to someone, then the upset comes across rather than the message. So you need to do some stuff to manage yourself. So there's all kinds of things that you can incorporate tapping in if you think about it, because it applies to so many areas. Of course, peak performance, I've done that in business, I've done that with sports people. Dealing with difficult people is another common title. Emotional resilience is one I'm doing a lot of lately, as you can imagine. I've done resilience for business people, or emotional resilience, emotional first aid, psychology of success, change management, all kinds of workshops. In fact, in my corporate tapping program, there's a list of about 30 different topics that I have been able to incorporate tapping into and find a way to use tapping within. The lessons from that area: when I work with someone, I'll focus on their problems and their needs first. I use their language. I don't even necessarily talk about tapping. I just focus on the results that they want. And then if I introduce tapping, I'm going to introduce tapping as part of a framework rather than just, you know, just talking straight out about tapping. When I was over in the US one time, there was someone who had managed to get in to meet with the managers of a major professional football team. And he said, oh, I didn't really get very far. And I said, oh, okay, what did you do? He said, I went in there and I started just showing them the tapping. And then the manager said, you know, oh my gosh, that's really ridiculous. And he said, and so I said, you're obviously psychologically reversed. Start tapping here and say these things. And he wouldn't go along with me. And I thought, wow, how not to get rapport. Man, if you want to get rapport with people in business, you've got to be able to talk business. If you want to get rapport with people who have problems, you've got to be able to talk about their problems. You've got to be able to use their language. You've got to be able to focus on the results that they want. So I'm going to talk to them about, you know, staff retention, or I'm going to talk to them about more sales, or I'm going to talk to them about the bottom line. I'm going to talk to them about less stress-related leave and the stuff that's important to them. And then tapping is going to be one of the tools that I use. And usually I'm going to introduce tapping as part of a framework where tapping isn't the only thing. I'm going to under-promise and I'm going to let the tapping over-deliver. In fact, if I could give you one other lesson for all of this, if you want to teach tapping to other people, under-promise about the tapping. Be less evangelical about the way that you put it across to people. I mean, I'm a little bit evangelical right now, but I'm assuming, okay, you all know tapping, so you're already into it. But with someone who's new to it, I'm going to be a little more potentially cautious and a little more tentative. And I'm not going to rave about the tapping. I'm going to under-promise and I'm going to let the tapping itself over-deliver. And then I'm going to build on the initial steps. So quite often, for example, I'll do tapping within a program. So the good news is, you know, before I did tapping, I was running workshops in communication and counseling and conflict resolution and all these things. So I have plenty of material there. And then I would put the tapping into them. And I would just introduce the tapping. And then usually from those presentations, there would be a lot of interest in doing that more. And then I could run a more advanced tapping program. So first you've got to get your foot in the door. You've got to find a way to do that. And then you can actually take it further. Start small and build is what I would say from that. Okay, after a while, David Lake and I had done a lot of EFT and we were meant to become EFT masters. And so we went along and here we are with the people that were in the EFT master program at that time who were being assessed to be EFT masters by Gary Craig. And it turned out that we did not become EFT masters. And there are a number of reasons why that was. But the major one, as far as Gary was concerned, was that we were doing more PET than EFT. So by that time, we had incorporated so much of the provocative approach and so much of our own humor and humorous style and so much continual tapping and so on, which is, you know, SET and PET combined. And so Gary basically said no. And it was actually a very difficult time for us to go through that. But ultimately, it was a really, really good thing that happened. Because what it led was for us to realize that we were doing something different. It led to us defining our unique approach and clarifying how it is different. And, you know, we called SET from the start, and we called PET from the start. We didn't call them EFT. There's a lot of people who do what we do in SET and they call it EFT, but we didn't. We called it what it is, and we started to define our unique approach. And I think you've got to do that ultimately if you're going to be successful in the tapping world. There is so much tapping out there now. And if you want to be successful in building a business in tapping, then I think you've got to put out there what it is that's unique about what's your point of difference. Whether your point of difference is that you specialize in a certain area, like I did in peak performance, or in trauma like David did, or relationships like David still does. He says, actually, he does trauma and relationships, and he reckons they're the same thing. Anyway, define the unique approach that you're using and how it's different. And why not just call it that, you know? Okay, there's something to be said for staying within the EFT world, and there was a loss to us of moving outside of that world. Although we, you know, Gary still loves us and we still love him, and, you know, we have all those wonderful connections within the EFT world. We weren't running EFT certification workshops, and we weren't going to follow that script. And therefore, potentially, we gave up a very big market of people who could have learned EFT from us, but we weren't going to teach them something that we had shifted from. And so we defined our unique approach, and we identified our points of difference, and we're going for it basically. And yeah, it's been a really interesting ride. Ultimately, we've refined our provocative energy techniques, you know, and the components of that are, you know, clear to some of you. The biggest part of that is the use of humor and playing devil's advocate, which is actually working with the resistance rather than trying to push against it, and exaggerating and blowing out that resistance quite often to the point where people are able to laugh at their problems. And so the humor and the heart connection and the use of tapping are all part of the healing in the provocative energy techniques approach. We developed our own certification. We have levels, so, you know, SET is the basic level. You just learn the basics of tapping the way we do. And then we have an advanced energy level. And then the PET is actually the greatest of those levels. We were acknowledged by EFT Dash, which is EFT associations for Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. They made us honorary members. So it's nice to have that acknowledgement. They came and presented that to us when we were in Stuttgart. And ultimately, we got to present at an event which we helped to organise in Brussels, which was an intergalactic affair with some of our revered teachers alongside us, such as Larry Nims and Tapas Fleming, and wonderful people, you know, Dr. John Diepold there. You've got Sandy Radomski, Willem Lammers, Andrea Frady, Yves Vautier, David Baselli, who's not in the picture, also presented there. It was just an absolutely fantastic event. And I'll just tell you something, a little secret. I got anxious. I got anxious before this thing because I was going to be up on stage in front of my revered teachers. And at first it surprised me because I hadn't felt anxiety like that for about 20 years or more, you know. I hadn't felt it to that level, you know, because I got used to presenting and so on. And so I did a lot of tapping on that, and I had some help from my friends. That's why it's good to have your friends with you. And, you know, you can't always do everything that you need to do with self-help. And that was very, very effective, you know. It's just another aspect that comes up every time you set yourself. Oh, and Eric says, and your laptop was stolen. Yeah, I forgot that. When you travel around the world, this happens. Yeah. It wasn't my laptop, actually. It was my entire bag, which included my passport and my laptop and some clothes and some money and all that stuff. And so I was actually meant to be the master of ceremonies for the entire event, but I had to spend the morning sitting in the embassy trying to get a new passport and so on. So that was another disturbing thing that happened that tapping actually helped me through. Ultimately, though, we've been having fun. And, you know, we've been able to connect with some wonderful people all around the world. We've been able to spread the love. We've been able to pass on what we've learned about how to use tapping and how to use humor and how to use energy and how to connect at a heart level. And here, by the way, are some people like the lady, as you're facing the screen, the blonde hair next to me, like this, on the side with three ladies. She's the one next to me, and that's Alka, our good friend, who I met right back in the provocative therapy world, and she's helped facilitate a number of workshops for us over in Germany as well. And we've had fun just doing PET. So the lesson from this one, enjoy what you do, you never work another day in your life. Then we were very fortunate to be invited by Sebastian van der Schrier to go to the Philippines and be part of a group that went up there to help after the massive typhoon hit land and wiped out heaps of places and killed thousands of people. And we took tapping there and we went around to the local villages and we taught it to the kids and we taught it to over 1,000 people who were trained to take it back to their villages and help the villages. And it was an absolutely fantastic thing to be part of. And, you know, I can only sing the praises of Sebastian for putting this together. And he did the same thing. He just made contact with all the people like us and said, would you like to be part of this? And we said yes. And I'm so glad that we did. We discovered that tapping transcends language barriers. And one person can make a big difference if they decide to do so, and then connect with other people to help make it happen. And giving back is the ultimate. And that's what I think, if you're doing tapping and you're learning tapping, then ultimately, once you've got some results with tapping, what you want to do is you want to give it to other people. You want to make a difference for other people, whether they be your friends, whether they be your family members, whether they be your clients, whether they be you know, people that you help through your products and services. And you know, ultimately, of course, with your own family, you can't be their therapist. You may need to send them on to a therapist or on to a coach. But I've been able to help all my kids with tapping. I've been able to help my wife with tapping, and she's been able to help me with tapping as well. And it's a great, great thing to be able to share around. I've been able to share it with my friends and help my friends. I helped one of my friends get over his public speaking fear, and he now is enjoying presentations and loving doing it. And he's now, you know, he was able to take a position, a national position, where he was able to take that on. It was so nice to be able to pass it on to him and just teach him the techniques. And of course, you know, we've been able to help thousands of people around the world, and some of you. All right, so where to for more? If it's okay, I want to share just a few things you can follow up with if you want to find out more about me. And then if you will hang on the line, I'm going to take the questions and answers for people who want to ask me anything about what we've been doing over the last little while, and anything about how to use tapping in a certain area, whether for self-help, for helping other people, or whether you're using tapping in your business. The best place to find out about our programs is EFTdownunder.com/training. We still actually have EFTdownunder.com because we invested a lot into that. It has a massive amount of information on EFT and all associated techniques, as well as our other techniques. I also have stevewells.com.au, and you can find out more about my corporate techniques on that website. And I also have a stress relief website and so on. So we're always creating more stuff all the time. But this is still kind of an umbrella website which has information about EFT, SET, and PET, stuff that other people have written as well as what we've written, videos, audios, and all that kind of stuff. Of course, most of you will know that because you have come from my newsletter, but anyone who's new, go to EFTdownunder.com and sign up for our newsletter, and you'll get our free Tapping Wisdom ebook and a bunch of other free stuff. And if you want to find out about courses that are coming up, just go to EFTdownunder.com/training. You'll see that I've got a workshop in Perth coming up, workshop in Italy, workshop in Germany, and also some online programs. In particular, for those of you who are in business, I have a program called Mad Business Breakthrough. This is for people who are in the business of making a difference. And I want to give you the benefits of 20 years of my business experience, not just in tapping, by the way. I've actually spent a number of those years working with business people to help them to develop their business. And I've learned a lot about how business works. And, you know, working at the Center for Entrepreneurship at Curtin University with business owners. And I've taught tapping to every one of them in every group. But I've also learned a lot of stuff. And so I've put together this program. I've run it in several places as a 3-day workshop, and now I've got it as an online program, and you can get involved from anywhere in the world. There are 2 time settings as opposed to today when I only had 1 time, and some of you are just going to be watching this on the replay. There are 2 time options, so you should be able to find one that suits your time zone. And I'm going to help you to create a compelling vision for your business, get over any blocks to doing that, learn how to apply tapping and my intention-based energy process to release your emotional blocks and any inner barriers to success, help you to clarify and your important values and the things that are essential for you from your business, and then give you the keys that I know about succeeding in business, any business, and get you to build a plan for success and help you to start putting it into action. We're going to look at the areas in business, from managing your business to marketing and promoting your business, promoting yourself, selling your services, managing your finances, building systems, and getting over what's blocking you from doing those. And so getting over your procrastination, email checking, daytime television watching, or whatever you're doing, instead of getting out there and making a difference with people in the way you want to. And the great thing is that you'll build connections within this. You know, I said at the start, you're just one connection away from whatever you want. And whether that's in your life personally in terms of your own success, or whether that's in terms of your business, you're just really one good connection away. You know, I've had so much help from all of those people. You know, I have so much gratitude for people like Gary Craig, and the fact that I was able to get together and learn from him, and then you know, he helped us so much in developing our businesses and helping the people that we were able to help. So I want to help you do the same thing. And I also know that when you get together with these people, some of them you'll develop a lifelong relationship with, and you'll be able to support each other to develop your own mad businesses. We're doing it live. It's via group video coaching calls on Zoom. There's 10.5 hours of live coaching with me, where you'll be online with me and we'll all be able to see each other via Zoom. It's a fantastic platform, and it works really, really well for just about everybody who's used it so far, you know, with very little downtime. This is starting very soon. It's the 4th of July in Australia, but it'll actually be the 3rd of July in the USA and Canada, because the 9 o'clock Perth time will be 6 p.m. Pacific time on the 3rd, and 9 p.m. Eastern time on the 3rd in the US. And the 3 p.m. Perth time will be 8 a.m. in London and 9 a.m. in a lot of Western Europe. So you should be able to find a time that suits your time zone. So the first 3 sessions are weekly, the next 3 sessions are fortnightly, and the next session is a month later. So I've designed it that way specifically so that we can get into it, get some work happening, get you out there doing some things, have a chance to try some stuff out, follow up with the group and get support. So here it is. Here's the components. There's 7 90-minute live sessions. Each session we're going to address a specific area of business, and I'm going to do live coaching with people. I'm going to give you as much content as I can, all the stuff that I know about this. You're going to get the recordings, and I'm going to give you the recordings of both group sessions. So you'll actually have 21 hours of recordings that you'll be able to review, but I need you to indicate that you're going to be in one of those sessions mainly. You're going to work in that session, but you're going to get the recordings to watch and learn from the other sessions, which is always an extra bonus. And we're going to have a private Facebook group where everybody's going to support each other and get feedback on what they're doing. So, of course, there is an offer. I made this offer recently. I just ran a webinar, so half of these places are taken at the special rate, but the full rate for the program, which includes the entire 10.5 hours of personal coaching, as well as the other 10.5 hours of recordings, so the whole 21 hours of recordings, and the joining in the group, and in the private Facebook group, you'll have access to me to provide you advice and assistance along the way, as well as the other group members. You'll be able to make contact with each other and so on. And we'll do that for a full 6 months. And the early bird rate is $4.99. The special rate for the first 20 places, of which half of them are taken so far, is $3.99. So if you get in now, this is in EFTdownunder.com/business-breakthrough-online/. Now you can also access that through the training section on the website. So if you just go to EFTdownunder.com and you go to training and scroll down, you'll find a link to the Business Breakthrough Program. Otherwise, you can get it directly on that link. All right, so for now, for those of you who are just staying for this 1 hour, wow, we made it in 1 hour. I can't believe that. There's so much more that I would love to cram in here. And I'm going to hang around for a while for those that want to hang around with me, and I'm going to answer your questions. I also have a question that's been sent in to me, and I will be answering that in the next half hour. So if you need to go now, I appreciate you spending the time with me. I hope you find a few tips and tools and lessons that I've put together. I hope you find them helpful. And just remember, you're just one connection away, one good connection with one key person away from whatever you really need to be successful in your life and in your business. Whether that connection is a coach, whether that connection is a group, whether that connection is someone who can actually, who you can practice with, or whatever. And if I can be that for you, then I look forward to the privilege. So thank you so much, everyone. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to stop the recording for now, and then we will start again in a moment. Ciao for now.